Welcome back to Pretty Girl AI, where ordinary lives reveal extraordinary power. Today we're sharing the story of a man who couldn't read a single word, yet he inspired an entire village to fall in love with learning. This isn't a story about what you lack, it's about what you can give. Let's dive in. Story. He can't read, but he teaches the whole village how to love knowledge. Part 1. The silent teacher in the middle of nowhere. Nestled between endless green rice fields and soft rolling hills sat a little village so small it barely had a name on the map. The air was thick with the scent of earth and growing things, and the rhythm of life followed the sun, up at dawn, asleep by twilight. Among the people of this village was an old man named Mr. Tam. Most days you'd find him wearing the same faded shirt and worn-out pants, barefoot and smiling under a straw hat so frayed it looked like it might blow away with the next gust of wind. His skin was dark and leathery from years spent in the sun, his hands calloused from a lifetime of farming, and his back bent from carrying more weight than his thin frame should have ever known. To a stranger passing by, Mr. Tam looked like any other farmer, ordinary, unremarkable, but to the children of the village he was something close to magic. They called him the Keeper of Knowledge. It was an odd title for a man who couldn't even read the simplest word. Mr. Tam had never gone to school. When he was a child, his family could barely afford enough rice for 3 meals a day, let alone the luxury of books and uniforms. Instead of carrying a school bag, young Tam had carried water from the river, had chased buffalo across muddy fields, and had helped his mother weed the stubborn rice paddies. He used to watch the other children, the lucky ones, as they walked to school, tiny satchels bouncing at their sides, heads full of numbers and stories. He used to listen from a distance when they recited poems aloud under the tamarind tree, his hands stained with mud, his heart aching with a longing he couldn't even name. When the village elders talked about history, he listened so hard it hurt. When travelers spoke about faraway places, cities with buildings that touched the clouds and machines that moved without horses, he stored away every word like treasure, tucking them deep inside his mind, where no one could steal them. Even though he couldn't read or write, Mr. Tam had become a living library of stories, riddles, farming techniques, old legends, and survival wisdom passed down from one generation to the next. He had something few people ever realized they possessed, an endless, burning love for learning. The village children adored him. They would race to his side after chores, their bare feet kicking up clouds of dust. They would sit in a circle around him in the evenings, swatting away mosquitoes and hanging onto his every word. His stories were better than any book could have been, woven with adventure, wonder, and wisdom. He taught them how to read the stars, how to know when the rains would come just by the smell of the wind, how to predict a storm from the way ants carried their eggs uphill. He showed them how to build bamboo traps for fish and how to cure fevers with simple herbs from the forest. He told them stories about ancient kings, brave warriors, trickster spirits, and clever orphans who outwitted greedy landlords. The children didn't realize it then, but Mr. Tam was teaching them something far greater than survival skills. He was teaching them curiosity. He was teaching them wonder. But still, there was a quiet sadness about Mr. Tam. At night, when the village fell asleep and the sky turned black and brilliant with stars, he would sit alone outside his little house, looking up. Sometimes he would hold a book someone had given him, an old, worn-out textbook from the city, filled with strange symbols and pictures. He would run his fingers over the pages, tracing the lines he could not understand, whispering to himself, "If only I knew what these meant." In his dreams, he imagined himself reading to the children, showing them words instead of just telling them stories. He imagined starting a little school right there under the tamarind tree, where every child, no matter how poor, could learn to unlock the magic of books. He didn't know how he could make that happen. He just knew that somehow, some way, he had to try, because even if he couldn't read, he understood better than anyone just how powerful knowledge could be. Mr. Tam's turning point came during one of those hot, heavy summers when everything moved slow, and the air itself seemed to hum with possibility. That summer, a group of volunteers arrived from the city, young people full of energy and ideas, their sneakers bright and new against the dusty village roads. They carried crates of donated books, paper, pencils, and colorful posters about hygiene, farming innovations, and children's rights. The village elders welcomed them politely but skeptically. Few people in the village could read. Fewer still believed it could change anything. But the children were fascinated. They crowded around the volunteers, flipping through picture books, marveling at the illustrations, pointing and laughing even though they couldn't understand a word. Their hands lingered over the glossy pages like they were holding something sacred. Mr. Tam watched from the shade of a tamarind tree, silent and thoughtful. He knew the books wouldn't be enough. Without someone to guide them, the books would just become decorations, dusty piles forgotten in corners. That night, as the volunteers packed up to leave, Mr. Tam made a decision that would change everything. He gathered the leftover supplies, books, broken crayons, scraps of chalk, and carried them home in an old rice sack slung over his shoulder. In the dim light of his one-room house, he cleared a corner of his dirt yard. He hammered together a rough frame with bamboo poles and stretched an old rice sack tight across it. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. It would be their blackboard. He carved a long stick into a crude pointer and dug a trench around the edge of his classroom to mark where the children would sit. And when the sun dipped low and the fireflies began their nightly dance, Mr. Tam lit a lantern, sat cross-legged by his homemade board, and waited. At first, only a few children came, curious, skeptical. But when he smiled and started telling stories again, this time using pictures, he drew himself in the dirt. More and more little feet came running through the dark. They sat in neat rows, wide-eyed and eager, hanging on to every gesture, Mr. Tam began teaching them the basics, the names of things they already knew. Rice, sun, water, buffalo. He showed them how each word was made of strange little lines and curves. He invented games, songs, and riddles to help them remember. He clapped his hands and danced silly dances when they answered correctly, making them laugh until they fell over. Slowly, word by word, idea by idea, Mr. Tam and his barefoot students chipped away at the wall of illiteracy that had surrounded their village for generations. He didn't need to know how to read perfectly. He only needed to show them why it mattered. And in doing so, something extraordinary began to happen. The children grew hungrier for knowledge. Parents, at first shy and embarrassed, began to linger at the edges of the lessons, listening in, learning alongside their kids. Someone donated a real chalkboard from the nearest town. A cousin from the city sent a box of second-hand books and a tiny, battery-powered lamp. The tamarind tree classroom became the heart of the village, beating with laughter, learning, and a future that no one had dared to dream of before. Mr. Tam never did learn to read fluently, but in the end, it didn't matter, because he had already done something far greater. He had planted a seed of knowledge so deep, so strong, that no storm, no drought, no poverty could ever uproot it. And for the children who sat cross-legged in the dirt every evening, the lesson they carried in their hearts wasn't just about letters or numbers. It was about something much bigger. The belief that learning could change everything, even in the smallest of villages, even in the humblest of homes, even in the hands of a man who had never held a book of his own. Part 2. Dirt chalkboards and bamboo pens. The summer drifted into fall, and the tamarind tree's leaves turned golden and brittle, raining down over the little classroom that had no walls and no roof. Every evening, Mr. Tam would arrive early, sweeping the dirt clean with a handmade broom, smoothing it carefully, until it looked like a giant dusty canvas. His students, barefoot and grinning, would show up carrying sticks, broken bits of chalk, and sometimes even scraps of paper if they had been lucky enough to find them. They didn't have desks. They didn't have chairs. They didn't even have enough pencils to share among them. But what they did have was something far rarer, a fierce, unstoppable hunger to learn. Mr. Tam's classroom ran on creativity and heart. He taught the children, how to sharpen bamboo sticks into pens by whittling the ends with a knife as old and worn as himself. They dipped the sticks into bowls of thick mud, drawing letters and numbers right onto the ground. Sometimes the letters came out too big, too messy, the mud splattering across bare legs and shorts. But no one cared. They laughed, wiped their hands on their shirts, and tried again. Mr. Tam would draw a huge letter A in the dirt with his own bamboo pen, then have the children copy it, their small hands trembling with concentration. He sang silly songs to help them remember the alphabet, making the kids giggle uncontrollably when he forgot the words or made up new ones on the spot. A is for ansang, light, B is for ban, cake, C is for kai, tree. They clapped in rhythm, making the lessons feel like games rather than work. Learning under Mr. Tam's tree was loud and messy and beautiful. Yet despite all the joy, there were moments of frustration too. Some children struggled to form the letters, their fingers clumsy and impatient. Some, like little Dewey, grew embarrassed when they forgot how to count past 10. There were days when the rain flooded the yard, turning their classroom into a muddy river and washing away all their careful writing. Those days, Mr. Tam would squat under the tamarind tree with the children huddled close beside him, sharing what little shelter the branches offered. He'd tell them stories instead. Stories about stubborn turtles who beat swift rabbits, about seeds that broke through rock because they refused to give up. He told them, "You only fail if you stop trying." The words stuck to their hearts like mud to their skin. One evening, a small miracle happened. A volunteer from the city, a young woman named Miss Lan, returned to visit. She had heard whispers about the old farmer who had started a school without knowing how to read. When she arrived at dusk, what she saw left her speechless. 100 children, hunched over the earth, writing careful letters in the dirt, their faces glowing with pride. Mr. Tam, barefoot and smiling, clapping along to a messy, joyous song about the alphabet. Miss Lan pulled out her phone and began recording, tears blurring her vision. This wasn't a scene from a fancy school with clean walls and polished floors. This was education in its purest, most powerful form. Word spread faster than wildfire. Within a month, a small nonprofit agreed to donate real supplies, blackboards, chalk, notebooks, even old textbooks discarded by city schools. The first time Mr. Tam unwrapped a stack of real notebooks, his hands trembled as if he were holding a box full of diamonds. He ran his fingers over the crisp pages, breathing in the clean, papery scent. He could not read the titles on the covers, but he understood something deeper. These pages held futures. These pages held dreams. The children squealed in delight when Mr. Tam handed out the notebooks, treating them like priceless treasures. Some kids opened them carefully, afraid the paper might crumble like leaves. Others hugged them tightly to their chests, as if afraid they might disappear. They spent the first lesson simply learning how to open and close the books, how to turn pages without tearing them. Mr. Tam showed them how to write their names on the first page, sometimes guiding their hands with his own rough, trembling fingers. Little Dewey, who had once been too shy to count aloud, proudly scrawled his name in crooked, sprawling letters. He ran to Mr. Tam and held the notebook high, beaming, like he had just conquered a mountain. "Look, Ong," he shouted, "I can write my name." Mr. Tam ruffled Dewey's hair, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You can write your name," he said, "and soon you'll write your dreams." With the arrival of real materials, new possibilities opened up. Miss Lan organized volunteers to come twice a month, offering simple lessons on hygiene, nutrition, and mathematics. A few high schoolers from the nearest town biked all the way in on weekends to help with reading practice. The little dirt classroom under the tamarind tree began to change. It sprouted benches made from scrap wood. It got a lean-to roof made from corrugated tin. And eventually it even earned a hand-painted sign, "The Learning Tree, Free for All." Children came from nearby villages, walking miles barefoot just for a few hours of lessons. Parents who had once scoffed that education was useless for farmers now begged Mr. Tam to make room for their kids. Even the village elders began to sit in on classes, nodding solemnly as they learned how to write their names for the first time. In their wrinkled lives, the fire Mr. Tam had sparked, quiet, almost invisible at first, had grown into a roaring, undeniable blaze. But Mr. Tam remained the same. He still wore his frayed shirt and walked barefoot on the dusty paths. He still spent his nights tracing books he could not read, whispering prayers into the darkness. He still sat under the stars after the lessons ended, gazing up at the sky with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found his purpose, even if the world had never given him a fair chance. In his heart, he believed one thing: maybe I can't read their books, but I've taught them how to write their own stories. Part 3. The light that never dies. Years rolled by, and the little learning tree became more than just a school. It became the beating heart of the village. Children who once stumbled through the alphabet were now confidently reading books, solving math problems and dreaming dreams that stretched far beyond the rice paddies and dusty roads. Some went on to study in the city. Some started small businesses. Some became teachers themselves. But no matter how far they traveled, they all remembered where their journey began, under the wide arms of an old tamarind tree, guided by a man who had no letters in his pocket, but a universe of wisdom in his soul, a new generation, a new mission. One crisp autumn morning, Mr. Tam sat outside the new brick building that had replaced the open-air classroom. His joints were stiff now. His hair, once black as river silt, had turned a soft, silvery white. He watched as young volunteers taught lessons inside, bright, enthusiastic, and filled with a passion he recognized instantly. A little boy ran up to him, clutching a book. Ong Tam, can you help me with this word?" the boy asked, breathless with excitement. Mr. Tam smiled and shook his head gently. "I can't read, little one," he said, voice warm like worn leather. "But if you read it out loud, I'll listen harder than anyone." The boy nodded, planted himself beside Mr. Tam, and began to sound out the words slowly, syllable by syllable. As the boy read, villagers walked by, some carrying baskets, some riding bicycles, some simply strolling hand in hand with their children. Each of them would tip their hats, bow their heads slightly, or offer a smile toward Mr. Tam, not because he was a teacher in the traditional sense, but because he had taught them something greater than words. He had taught them to believe. A simple ceremony, a monumental moment later that month, the village elders decided to hold a small ceremony in Mr. Tam's honor. Nothing fancy, just a gathering by the learning tree, some homemade banners, and a giant pot of steaming pho cooked by all the grandmothers combined. They unveiled a wooden plaque nailed to the trunk of the tamarind tree. It read, "Here stood Mr. Tam, who could not read but taught a village to dream." Mr. Tam stood there, blinking at the plaque, feeling a strange, overwhelming swell in his chest. He didn't understand all the fancy words, but he understood the feeling behind them, the gratitude, the respect, the love. As the sun set, the children, dozens of them now, spanning generations, gathered around him. One by one, they lit candles and placed them at the base of the tree, their small flames flickering against the twilight sky. The light pooled around Mr. Tam's bare feet, warm and golden, a living testament to the fire he had kindled long ago, with nothing but mud, bamboo, and an unstoppable heart. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, not of sadness, but of something deeper, a profound, soaring pride. The legacy lives. On Mr. Tam passed away peacefully several winters later, under the very tree where he had started his improbable school. The village mourned, not with heavy grief, but with songs, laughter, and stories shared late into the night. Exactly the way he would have wanted. They didn't build a marble statue in his honor. They didn't rename the village. Instead, they kept the learning tree alive. New teachers came and went, but the spirit of the place never changed. Children still scratched letters in the dirt. Stories were still told under the shade of the tamarinds. Massive arms. Dreams still grew wild and free like the grass at its roots. And each year, on the anniversary of Mr. Tam's first lesson, The entire village gathered beneath the tree, lit candles, and whispered his words. You only fail if you stop trying. The light never dimmed. The dream never died, because one man without a single page to his name had planted a seed of knowledge so deep, so enduring, that even time itself could not uproot it. Mr. Tam's story reminds us, you don't need wealth, fame, or even formal education to change the world. Sometimes all you need is the courage to light a single spark, and the faith that others will keep it burning. Thank you for joining us today on Steps of Change. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone who could use a reminder that greatness often begins in the most humble places. Until next time, keep learning, keep dreaming, and remember, even if you can't read every book, you can still help someone write their future.